Thank you all so much for being here. This, of course, is NLIHC's HoUSed campaign for long-term housing solutions. And I am Kim Johnson, NLIHC Senior Director of Policy. It is my pleasure to welcome you here today for a great webinar. We're going to be covering a lot of the latest information around the Trump administration's FY26 budget proposal. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So we're going to start off with an overview of the proposal and then get into some of the details, including threats to rental assistance programs that are being proposed by the White House, threats to the Low-Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, that are also being proposed. And we're going to get some updates from what's going on the ground and how people and advocates all around the country can work together to take action to defend HUD's vital programs from potential funding cuts. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. Next slide, please. So I'm going to begin with an overview of President Trump's FY26 skinny budget request. And for just a little bit of level setting to make sure that everybody is on the same page and we're all, speaking the same language, what is a skinny budget request? So a skinny budget request acts as a preview for the president's full budget request. Usually, if a skinny budget comes out, it's to give the White House more time to draft the text of their full budget, while also giving Congress the information that it needs to start the appropriations process. We're expecting the president's full budget request to come out either later this month, which is, slowly trickling down, or potentially in June. And so one thing that I want folks to keep in mind as we're having this conversation today is that the president's budget request, skinny or not, represents the president and his administration's priorities. So it is a wish list and not an inevitability. And I say that because some of the topics that we're going to cover today can feel really heavy and very daunting. But I don't want people to leave this call thinking that everything that we talk about is definitely going to happen, because together and with our advocacy, we are going to fight back and make sure that people have the resources that they need to find and maintain safe, stable housing. So let's jump in. Next slide, please. So what does the skinny request propose for housing and homelessness assistance? The skinny request would cut HUD's budget by about 44% from the previous fiscal year, and that would be a historic cut to HUD funding. That includes cutting about $26.7 billion, or about 43%, from HUD's rental assistance programs. In fact, the budget proposal proposes essentially redesigning HUD rental assistance entirely. And my wonderful colleague Sonia Acosta is going to dive more into what I mean by that and the implications for voucher holders and continued funding. We also saw in this skinny request a proposal to cut homeless assistance grants by $532 million. So that would be about a 13% decrease from FY25. And the proposal would consolidate programs under the Emergency Solutions Grants Program. The practical effect of that essentially would be, it would make it harder for communities to use that homeless assistance funding to provide permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, because those ESG funds are usually used for short-term and medium-term housing assistance. The proposal would also impose a 2-year time limit on receiving rental or homelessness assistance for able-bodied adults. And so those are people who do not have a disability and are not in a caretaking position, or older adults, or I guess over the age of 65. The proposal would also cut $479 million from the Native Housing Block Grant Program, or the Indian Housing Block Grant Program, and consolidate both the Indian Housing Block Grant Competitive Program and the Native Housing Block Grant that's supposed to say Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant Program under that bigger Indian Housing Block Grant Program. So really just consolidating all of these programs while also slashing funding for them. Next slide, please. In addition, the request would cut funding for the Lead Hazard Reduction and Healthy Homes program. And it would fully eliminate programs, including the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Home Investment Partnership Program, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, Pathways to Removing Obstacles or pro-housing grants, which help communities identify zoning restrictions that are holding up affordable housing development, and the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, which helps communities investigate fair housing complaints. Next slide, please. And so what about some other programs? And again, our wonderful colleague Olivia is going to get into some of the details for the LIHEAP program later on in this call. But just to flag for folks too, it would cut funding for FEMA's non-disaster grant programs by about $646 million and eliminate FEMA's Shelter and Services program. In the Department of Agriculture, which has jurisdiction over rural housing and development programs, it would actually propose increasing funding for rental assistance grants by about $74 million, while simultaneously cutting funding for rural development programs by $721 million. And finally, as I mentioned, in the Health and Human Services Department, the budget request would fully eliminate the Low-Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP. Next slide, please. And so like I mentioned, I didn't want folks to kind of leave, and we're going to share all of these resources too. But I didn't want folks to leave this call or feel hopeless or like there's nothing that we can do, because again, this budget request, the skinny request, is just that, a request and not a reality. And so we still have the power to fight back and defend the programs that we know help keep people safely and stably housed and help people find housing when they need it. So we have a national letter that organizations can sign opposing cuts to federal housing investments and supporting expanded resources for affordable housing and homelessness assistance. Folks can also contact their members of Congress. We have an additional resource around storytelling tips and tricks for folks who are interested in sharing their stories with members too. And for people who are interested in taking action on the emergency housing voucher funding cliff and housing choice voucher funding, we have a full toolkit that is ready for advocates to use. So with all of that being said, I am going to pass it now over to my wonderful colleague at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Sonia Acosta, to talk a little bit more about that emergency housing voucher cliff and the skinny budget's proposal to redesign rental assistance. Sonia, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Kim, and good afternoon, everyone. Grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all about this, even though it's certainly not the most positive updates, but I think there's still a lot that can be done. Like Kim was just explaining, this, kind of partial budget request is really going in the opposite of what is needed to really address the affordable housing and homelessness crisis. I think a more apt description, other than skinny budget, is a starvation budget, because it is really it would deprive millions and millions of people of the resources that they need. If we can go to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit more about what the proposal is around rental assistance in this budget request. And just to note right away that, like Kim was mentioning, this is just kind of the first glimpse of the budget request. It doesn't include a lot of details. It's like 4 or 5 sentences of text. And so some of the questions about what this would look like, we don't know yet, and we won't know until the administration puts out more details. But here's what we do know. So the proposal around rental assistance is that it would lump together 5 different programs into one block grant that would then go to states. So the 5 different programs are the Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8 Project-Based Rental Assistance, public housing, Section 202 housing for the elderly, and Section 811 supportive housing for persons with disabilities. So essentially the five largest rental assistance programs that the federal government operates. Would lump all of those together into a single block grant and then cut it by $27 billion, which is about 43%. And so that would leave millions of people without assistance. Like I said, the details of kind of what this would look like are a little unclear, but there is a mention of continuing assistance for foster youth and prioritizing older adults and people with disabilities within the framework of this block grant. But really our goal is and should be to help everyone instead of cutting assistance for people in need while we have the administration simultaneously pushing for tax cuts that benefit billionaires. And like Kim mentioned, there's also a policy proposal to implement time limits on how long someone could receive rental assistance, and it would be for 2 years. It would likely exclude older adults, so folks over the age of 65 and some people with disabilities, but again, we don't have a lot of details about who this would apply to. And these sorts of time limits really ignore the realities that we know exist around low wages and high rents. NLIHC has their wonderful annual report, Out of Reach, that really shows the realities for low wage workers and how hard it is for people to make enough money to actually afford rent. Go to the next slide. So the other part of this, right, is thinking about the idea of block granting rental assistance. But what we know is that block granting assistance will just lead to future cuts. In this same budget proposal, as Kim mentioned, the administration proposes eliminating or deeply cutting all of the major housing block grant programs. And so this would just be setting up rental assistance for that same pattern. And we see this not just in housing, but across programs that serve people with low income. So here's a chart. It only goes through 2017, but these trends certainly continue. And you can see that over time, the funding for block grant programs just decreases, both in terms of inflation adjusted value and as well as just nominal value. And the idea of then having states kind of administer these programs just means that then the states are responsible for implementing those harsh cuts, takes the responsibility off of Congress. And the budget also mentions that states would be encouraged to share costs, but if you are cutting resources by almost half, any resources that a state can afford to provide towards rental assistance would just be offsetting those cuts and not really making any meaningful progress towards where we need to be. We can go to the next slide. So this, here we are with the administration calling for cuts. We know that there are some folks in Congress who might be supportive of this level of cut. And complicating this a little bit is that we also need some additional funding this year to ensure that people with emergency housing vouchers can stay housed. So the emergency housing voucher program was created in 2021. It received $5 billion for the program. That was it, right? It was a set amount of funding. The program was targeted to people at risk of or experiencing homelessness, as well as survivors of domestic violence and trafficking. The funding, that $5 billion, is projected to run out midway through 2026, although some agencies might have funding running out sooner than that, as soon as this year. And the reason for kind of this quick, or I shouldn't say quick, but this sooner than anticipated running out of funds is because of the rapid rent increases that we saw in 2021 and 2022. It just led to higher program costs that ate up a lot of the resources more quickly than was originally anticipated. But there are still more than 59,000 households who rely on emergency housing vouchers to pay the rent each month. And communities, housing agencies, they lack the resources to transition those households to other programs like the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And even if they do, because funding is so limited, it really is a zero-sum game where if you have someone with an emergency housing voucher and you give them a housing voucher instead, it just means that someone who's on the wait list is going to have to continue waiting longer. And already people are waiting years and years to receive a voucher. We can go to the next slide. So I think Kim just dropped in the chat a link to the toolkit that she mentioned earlier that CPPP, NLIHC, and our partners at the National Alliance to End Homelessness and the National Housing Law Project have put together. And this toolkit will help you with any advocacy around this. And it's really important to lift up the stories of people in your community with EHVs to help people understand who these households are. And on the screen are just a few examples that I found through some reporting that's happened, right? You have a mom and her kids who are living in a motel after her husband died, and they were able to move into a stable home near a good school with public transportation so she could get to work. A dad and his daughter moving out of a shelter in New York City. A mother able to, get out of an abusive relationship. Someone, a trafficking survivor who was able to finally have stability and calm. And that is like such a core part of stable housing, is that calm. So we really encourage people to use that toolkit to do both federal advocacy in pushing for additional resources, as well as state and local advocacy to make sure that, you can try to identify additional resources to help these households, to make sure that local elected officials are aware of the issue and doing what they can to help address it. If we can go to the next one. So just to sum up kind of what I talked about and put it into a little more of a ask format and what you might be lifting up with your members of Congress. So first, it's just fully funding housing vouchers so that we make sure we're helping at the very least the same number of households. And this year, that includes ensuring that no one who has an emergency housing voucher loses their assistance. The second is just to reject any proposals to block grant rental assistance. It's going to result in cuts now as well as in the long term. The third is to make sure that there are no policies that take assistance away from people. And that includes things like time limits or work requirements, which we have heard that Secretary Turner supports. The fourth is just to always remember the end goal, and looking forward, what we need is a rental assistance guarantee so that we're not having to play this game of deciding who should get assistance or, kind of moving resources around. Everyone who needs it can get it. We know that rental assistance is a proven tool to ending homelessness. We know that the need is high, and we also know that improvements can be made to the program, but these improvements to the program shouldn't be denying people assistance. So I think now we can turn to some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sonia. A lot of great questions have come in while you were talking, and Sonia and I are going to tackle them together. So first, a lot of questions around the 2-year limit on assistance that's proposed in that skinny budget. Just kind of folks asking for additional details. When does that start? Is that a lifetime 2-year limit? All very reasonable questions to ask when being faced with a proposal like that. But unfortunately, Sonia, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have the answers for it because the skinny budget doesn't provide any of those details.
That's right. Yeah, we will need to wait until they release a full budget, and maybe then they will provide more details, but honestly, it could be that they don't. The fewer details again, this is just a proposal, right? And so this is the administration signaling to members of Congress that this is something that they would support. And it could be that a member of Congress is the one who actually fills in those details and not the administration.
Thank you. So I was just looking through some of our questions, and a really good question about the kind of intersection of these proposals and disability rights advocacy. Are the housing cuts for those with disabilities coinciding with cuts to or more stringent requirements for those who are on limited income, like SSDI? So is there any kind of intersection between SSDI and these cuts that we're seeing to housing assistance?
I am not sure what proposals have been put out around SSDI right now. It's certainly something that I can ask some of my colleagues at the center about. Um, but overall, we know that this administration is trying to make it much more difficult for anyone to receive assistance. So it would not surprise me if right, we were seeing that kind of attack from all angles.
Definitely. A great question too from Heather. Could we talk about the timing of the budget, including some essential committees and folks that advocates should be talking to? And I can kick us off with answering that and then turn it on over to you, Sonia. So for timing of the budget, we're expecting the president's full budget request to be released later this month or in the beginning of June. It's been pushed back. The due date has been a little bit since kind of initial reporting, but now we're looking at potentially June. For kind of the broader budget, Congress needs to have something in place by October 1st of this year. That's when the new fiscal year begins. So whether that's a brand spanking new FY26 budget or a continuing resolution to kind of kick the can down the road and buy Congress more time at finalizing that FY26 budget really depends. But everything kind of needs to be done or something needs to happen by that October 1st deadline. Another kind of looming consideration that we actually didn't get into too is the debt ceiling that is also going to come up against a timeline, although I know Republicans are kind of hoping they might address that in the reconciliation package. But I think that might be too much to tackle for right now, so we can leave that to another call. But as far as essential committees and members of Congress that advocates should be weighing in with, so one, I want to say there's no wrong door. If you are able and willing to get in contact with your member of Congress, then please do so. And when we kind of look at who are we prioritizing, it's really helpful to talk to folks who are on the House or Senate Appropriations Committee. So that would be Patty Murray out in Washington, Susan Collins up in Maine, Cindy Hyde-Smith in Mississippi I know I'm being quizzed, is the Senate THUD chair, yes. And Gillibrand in New York is the Senate THUD ranking member. On over in the House, we have Tom Cole, who is from Oklahoma, as the chair, and Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut as the ranking member. And then on the subcommittee, let's see if I can get it. We have Steve Womack from Arkansas, and then the ranking member, Clyburn, I believe, in South Carolina. Wow. Okay, that made me really sweaty. But yes, I will be happy to follow up with folks too in our readout to just highlight some of those kind of priority offices. And of course, again, like no wrong answer. If you have a member of Congress, then please weigh in with them and tell them the importance of HUD funding for your communities, your neighbors, and your families. Sonia, anything you would add to that?
No, just that I'm very impressed that you could remember everybody.
Thank you. I am too. I did not anticipate remembering all of them, so this is a good day for me. Let's see. Some additional questions that came in too. Another great question about kind of what's going on in Congress. What is the appetite for this level of cuts around among congressional Republicans? Sonia, do you want to kick that one off since I just kind of rambled?
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, but we do know that, rental assistance and ensuring that rental assistance was kind of renewed each year has been a high priority for Congress for decades on a bipartisan basis. Under the last Trump administration, we did not see major cuts. In fact, we saw some increases for housing programs that were really important. So we would hope to see that continued support. I think the idea of a block grant around rental assistance is unlikely to gain traction, particularly this year. I think something like a 2-year time limit is much more likely to gain traction. And so that, I think, is the proposal to really pay attention to. And so it's important in any of your advocacy to not leave that out. But we also don't want to pretend, or, we don't want to assume that this proposal with these deep cuts will just immediately get ignored. We have heard from the Senate side that that level of cut is not something that they're interested in doing. Senator Collins was clear about that, which is great to hear. But again, we just can't really assume anything in this political climate. And so it's still really important to make sure that your members of Congress understand how important these programs are for your communities, for their communities.
Awesome. Thank you, Sonia. And yeah, just seconding what Sonia said to really underscoring the fact that a lot of Republican members of Congress, including people like Tom Cole, really understand, and Steve Womack too, understand the importance of rental assistance to housing stability. And so, showing up and making sure that they stand by those laurels that they've professed is going to be really important for advocates, especially folks who are in those communities and who Chair Cole and Chair Womack represent. I will say, again, like Sonia said, there's not a lot of appetite too from Congress around reforming rental assistance into a state block grant program. But I think the danger with any of these proposals is not just kind of the reality of them getting through right now, but the possibility of those ideas kind of taking hold and gaining traction in the future. And so we kind of want to make sure that we're nipping stuff in the bud before they have the chance to spread and gain traction. So there are a lot of other questions that have come in, and I'm going to ask you one more, Sonia, and then we are going to move along. But if you're able to stick around and answer some questions in the chat, that would be awesome. Question, what are we seeing in terms of the impact of how is the administration dealing with able-bodied adults versus people with disabilities, and how would the administration handle ongoing support for people with disabilities?
I'm not sure that we can say much about that. Can you? Yeah.
Yes. So I kind of stumbled through that question a little bit, but I do think that the crux of it basically is are there any plans for the administration to kind of take away assistance for people with disabilities, impose work requirements, time limits on folks who need that assistance in order to find affordable, accessible housing?
Yeah, there isn't anything on work requirements. And, again, the details are really not there in terms of like who might be impacted. So it's hard to know if there would be like carve outs for specific groups of people in terms of requirements around time limits and things like that. So I don't think we can trust this administration to protect anybody. It doesn't seem that they're particularly interested in ensuring that people with disabilities have support. I think there's maybe some lip service to it, but again, we don't have the details, and certainly some of their other proposals don't seem to kind of suggest that that would be important to them. And I think too, right, we want to be really mindful of ensuring that everyone gets the assistance that they need, and not kind of playing into any dynamics that they are trying to push around who is deserving, or pitting groups against each other in terms of like who needs assistance more, which I think they're very good at and have been doing a lot. When you look at how they talk about immigrants. We see that, right? Everyone needs a safe, stable home. And so how can we make that happen?
Thanks, Sonia. Beautifully said, and thank you again for joining. I do just want to flag for folks too, because I see a lot of questions coming in around the ESG proposal and homelessness funding. We are actually going to have another webinar next week on May 21st. Sorry, I was looking at my calendar in the distance. It's on May 21st at 1 p.m. and I'll drop a registration link in the chat. But that is going to be with our wonderful colleagues again at the Center on Budget and at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And they're going to really delve into some more details of the budget and especially the homelessness provisions in that budget. So you won't want to miss it, and they'll be able to answer those questions that folks have much better than I will. So I will be sure to drop the link in the chat to that as soon as I stop talking. But before then, I want to introduce our next speaker for today's call, Olivia Wayne, who is a senior attorney with the National Consumer Law Center and is going to be talking about the Low-Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program. Olivia, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I just also wanted to say that the National Consumer Law Center has been around for decades. I work in the portion of the organization that focuses on affordable essential utility service, so energy, water, and telecom. Boy, I will say that this spring was just full of surprises. On April 1st, the entire LIHC staff was riffed as part of that 10,000 HHS sort of gigantic riff. Stakeholders lifted their voices. We got in the press. We pushed back. Right now, the staff is on administrative leave, but the big date that we're keeping an eye on is June 2nd, and that's when they become officially terminated. That's a loss of a lot of expertise. So we are concerned about program implementation. Should we be successful in getting the funding? Who will be administering this program at the federal level? Some good news, and that question is an open question. Some good news is that LIHC has enjoyed bipartisan support in the past, and we were able on May 1st to get the last remaining portion of fiscal year 2025 funding. So no haircut, just the full, it was the remaining 10% under the continuing resolution. There will be like a one-pager that will be shared with everyone afterwards with links, but one of the links in that one-pager, which is showing up in the chat, is to the HHS announcement. And if you scroll to the bottom, there will be these state-by-state charts if you want to see how much your state got in this final release of funding. Sadly, we are in the position of fighting back. We're starting from a skinny budget that zeroes out LIHC. The justifications were really troubling that were provided. So two organizations have provided sort of a blow-by-blow response to the justifications, and they were things like states have disconnection protections, you don't need LIHC, and sort of ignores the fact that a disconnection moratorium, should you have one in your state, doesn't get rid of the utility debt. So, you know, that arrearage accrues and becomes due and will probably lead to disconnection. We are also, at the same time, we're fighting to get the staffing back at LIHC. We're focused on the FY 2026 appropriations ask, and Secretary Kennedy is going to be in front of House Labor HHS in the morning, and then Senate Help in the afternoon. Many of the groups have approached our friends that sit on these committees to try and plant some LIHC staffing questions. I know that he will be bombarded with a whole host of questions, but hopefully we can get a LIHEAP question asked either in the morning or in the afternoon regarding his plans to ensure that there's no disruption to the program from the firing of the staff. We have been sharing with folks that Senate appropriations testimony is due June 13th. So that is also another place for groups to weigh in on programs. So for LIHEAP, we're looking at the labor HHS, the labor HHS appropriations, but the June 13th, I think, applies to all the Senate appropes outside witness testimony. So there's a link in there with instructions. I think there's a 4-page maximum. These things are very brief, so that don't have to worry about writing something long. It's a great place to lift up your stories and the importance of the programs that you want funded. NCLC is also gathering stories. So we do have a story collection website. We're also trying to save the weatherization program, which is sort of related to LIHEAP. Same population is being targeted, same drill, fired the staff, getting rid of the funding. And then just wanted to end on the Dear Colleague letters. So it's a program that has bipartisan support in the Senate and the House. So on the House side, it's Congressman Garbarino's office who's sort of leading the charge, but it's Garbarino in New York, Bergman in Michigan as the Republicans, VC in Texas, and McGovern in Massachusetts as the Dems for the House Dear Colleague fiscal year 2026 LIHEAP appropes. And then on the Senate side, it's a Murkowski, Reed Murkowski letter that's circulating. So right now we, it's still early days, but the signatures are coming in and they are bipartisan, mostly Ds, but we do have some Rs. So that's giving us some hope. Again, it's a two-pronged fight. We're going to fight for the funding, but we also have to figure out the answer to what do we do when they fired the expertise at the federal level. So we need an answer to that question. And that is where we are. Oh, I should say, what are we funded at? 4.1 billion right now. That was the fiscal year 2025 total funding amount.
Thank you so much, Olivia, for that great overview of a very important program that is really facing a lot of challenges to serving its intended purpose and the people that it is supposed to be helping. So I see a question in the chat. Is there a date for the termination of LIHEAP employees?
Yes, June 2nd. Right now, they're technically on administrative leave. And we do know that they did call in at least one staffer off of leave. And I think it was just for a couple of days to help work on the release, that last 10% of this year's LIHEAP funding, because you have to run through a complicated formula to get the state-by-state allocations. So, they should really hire that person back. They're not going to need them just once. So it is the world we're in.
Yeah, it's almost like the people who were working there served an important function in making sure that funding got out to communities that need it. Who knew? Let's see. Do you have any recommendations, Olivia, for how folks can take action and defend the LIHEAP program? I know you mentioned, NCLC is collecting stories. There's the commenting opportunity as well, but is there anything else that you would want to highlight for advocates?
Oh, absolutely. The district offices, sort of contacting them when they're home, inviting them out to sort of see, meet with the client, see intake, just the real importance that this stuff does. There's in the one pager that will be shared with you, NUAC, National Energy and Utilities Affordability Coalition toolkit, and it's full of stats, like state by state stats that you can, provide, like how many people were unable to pay their energy bill that month or went through like great sacrifice to get that done. So those kind of statistics, how many people LIHEAP helped in the state, you know, and break out by certain demographics, age, whether they had a disability or a very young child, that type of thing. So you can sort of, you know, using those fact sheets, using your stories, sort of pull together a nice, you know, LIHEAP 101 in your district sort of story.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia. And then just one more clarifying question in the that came in. Did I hear you say that they are also eliminating the weatherization assistance program?
Yeah. It is weatherization, the staff, it's not a RIF. They were using the fork in the road, the Doge fork in the road. So they're pushing sort of the early retirement option. So the undo button is really hard, but we're about to be in a situation immediately this month of May where we're going from 32 full-time employees to 10. And I think, you know, the budget reconciliation is further going to decimate the sort of department that those employees are in within the Department of Energy. What this will mean for those weatherization programs. And in LIHEAP, you can, as a state, you know, roll over 15% of your LIHEAP budget into the weatherization program. I mean, it's short-term, long-term energy affordability solutions. It will mean for the contractors doing the work delays in getting paid, because now you're going to only have 10 people covering the whole country. And, you know, it's not good. It's not good. So we have been working with the contractor network, you know, the private sector, who may have, you know, better relationships with the R's, to sort of tell that story. It's about jobs. It's about the local economy. I mean, they buy their supplies locally. This is not stuff you can offshore. Like, these workers do work in the districts, improving the housing in the district. So it's a multi-pronged fight. But if you go to the nclc.org website, you can sort of see the things we've been up to and the letters we've been sending. But again, we will with weatherization be focused on getting some Senate appropriations in as well, about the importance of the program, needing the staff. They need to come up with a solution, because these folks have taken, a lot of them have taken the deferred retirement plan. And so they're off, they're gone. There's no undo button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Olivia, for those updates. Important, even as they are difficult to hear. And we will certainly have you back on as things continue to develop. Thank you again. And if you have the capacity to stick around and keep an eye on the chat for any questions, that would be great. But thank you again.
I'll put my email in the chat too.
Fantastic. All right, and now it's my pleasure to welcome Kathy Alderman, who is the Chief Communications and Public Policy Officer at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And she's going to be talking about some on-the-ground impacts and advocacy work that she and her team have been engaging in. Kathy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Kim. I'm unable to turn my video on, so somebody may have to do that for me. But meanwhile, there we go. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back on this call. I'm Kathy Alderman, Chief Communications Public Policy Officer of Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. I also have the honor of being a board member for the National Low Income Housing Coalition and our state and tribal partners chair. So want to huge shout out and thanks to the NLIHC staff who always pull together such wonderful information for these calls and for everything else. And also want to thank my team for the issues that we're going to be discussing briefly today. I'm going to drop a link to a report in the chat that we put out just prior to the policy forum in March. This is Housing with Supportive Services, an evidence-based approach. And we wanted to pull this information together for a couple of reasons. We know that there are attacks on the Housing First model coming from the administration, coming, just in general from some some more conservative leaning organizations like Cicero and some local organizations in Colorado, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we wanted to make sure that we were talking about the evidence-based solutions of Housing First, but with slightly different language. Because Housing First, unfortunately, has been pegged lately as kind of housing only, housing without requirements. And so we wanted to make it very clear that when we talk about using Housing First as a proven solution for resolving homelessness for individuals, for families, that it's that housing with supportive services model that we're talking about. Now, it's not mandatory services, which is the counter to Housing First right now, is this treatment first and work first kind of interventions and models that folks are looking to fund. And so we released this updated briefing materials in advance of our congressional hearings, because we really wanted to arm our friendly congressional offices with some of this kind of evolving language on Housing First and how to talk about it being a proven solution, but again, not letting the Trump administration and Cicero Institute paint it as housing only. So I hope you will find the report interesting. It is a little Colorado specific in some spots, but certainly it could be tailored to anybody's state if you have some data you wanted to put in there. So we released the report, we took it to our congressional offices, and then on the ground in Colorado, we had a couple of things happen. The first was a sister city to the city of Denver, Aurora, Colorado, has really been pushing a work first or treatment first model for a newly acquired navigation center. And this city has a mayor that is a former congressman, Mike Kaufman, a Republican, who has really bought into the idea of work first and treatment first. And so he is hoping to kind of shift the narrative to make HUD funding available for these preconditioned models. And that is ultimately the goal, is to shift the priorities at HUD away from Housing First policies into this intervention first, work first, treatment first model. And so, I've been responding to that locally on the ground. We wanted to have the data to show that Housing First works, housing First with supportive services, and that it really is the best model. And then just recently, we had a local organization called the Common Sense Institute, for those of you in Iowa, Oregon, and there's one other state, Arizona. You also have a local Common Sense Institute. And this is an organization that proclaims to be bipartisan and unfortunately is very partisan indeed, and really lifts up a lot of Republican talking points. I also often describe them as an organization that has a conclusion that they go out and look for facts to prove, and it's often not common sense at all. And so the Common Sense Institute for year over year has released reports on homelessness that cherry pick data that wildly misrepresent spending. They are modeled very much after the Cicero Institute, and they really focus in on criticizing largely Democratic mayors on crime, spending, homelessness, and now they've really moved into the climate space as well. And so they just recently put out a report saying that Aurora was going to do this work first model, and that it was a proven model. And they have it as a proven model based on the fact that Aurora wants to do it, and then one shelter down in Colorado Springs has done it, but doesn't have a great deal of data on it. And so I will put in the chat our response to that report, which we've responded to every year, every time they put out a report on homelessness, because of their misuse of data. And we just think it's really important for folks to be aware that these groups are out there. They're lifting up these messages. They are, doing it very intentionally to direct funds away from these proven models, because they believe that people should be engaged in work programs and treatment programs. And frankly, We do too, but we don't think that people that don't have substance use disorders should be getting substance use treatment. And we think that people that are already on a pathway to employment shouldn't have to prove that they are employed in order to get access to housing resources. We know that housing is the foundation on which those other issues can be resolved. And so, so we're still working on kind of pushing back on this narrative as it's happening on the ground, but we think it has broader national implications. And so we wanted to share these resources with you today. If you do have a Common Sense Institute in your state that is issuing reports and you'd like some assistance on responding to those locally, we are more than happy to help. Again, I think it's really important to make sure that these organizations are not being lifted up as the research entities that know these issues that they report on, because they in fact do have a very political purpose. And I think it is really harmful in the long run to undermine proven programs with their talking points. So I share this with you in terms of what we're doing on the ground to push back on this narrative, but also that I think this is going to be something that we're going to be really having to work through at the national level over the coming months and years. And so all the resources that we have at our fingertips that we can use to push back on it, I think will be helpful. And we welcome anyone to repurpose what we have created in order to do that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you, as always, to you and your team for the excellent work that you're doing on the ground in Colorado. We have a question from Sheila that came in. Gavin Newsom, who is the governor of California, for folks who might not know, is proposing state-level banning of homeless encampments. Is this impacting the conversation on housing first?
I think absolutely, because I talked to a lot of reporters about the housing crisis and homelessness, and homelessness cannot be solved without the investments in housing. California, like Colorado, has a very high cost housing market and doesn't have enough affordable housing. And so to simply say to a group of people that you can't be in public spaces because you are unhoused, and at the same time not provide those housing resources that could remedy that situation is very counterproductive. And we know time and time again, we have seen that criminalization of homelessness does not solve homelessness. It does reduce visible homelessness, and it may make some people feel better because they see less people. But in fact, we are spending twice as much on those individuals by having them in jail and emergency services than we would if they were simply housed with supportive services in the community.
Absolutely. And we were getting a lot of questions too in the chat earlier about kind of what are the other actions that folks can take. And so relatedly, Kathy, are there any talking points that you have found to be particularly helpful with, say, more conservative members of the state delegation? And what would you recommend to advocates who are looking to take action in their own communities?
Yeah, so for the first question, I would say just the point that I just made, that if you are truly a fiscal conservative, you would advance and promote housing policies that provide housing to the lowest income households and those households trying to exit the cycle of homelessness, because it is far less expensive and a far better use of taxpayer dollars than letting people cycle through emergency shelters, emergency rooms, jails, detox facilities. And not to dismiss the huge community impacts that street homelessness has in terms of waste, trash, street cleaning, and services on the street. So it's better for the individuals to be housed, it's better for the community, and it's a better use of taxpayer dollars. In terms of what you can do on the ground, I think it's really important to shift. I think nationally and locally, we all need to shift our language a little bit about housing first. We can no longer just say housing first works, which is the title of our former report. We have to say housing first with supportive services, or housing with supportive services. That supportive services component is really critical to making sure people understand that we also believe in helping people get employed, to get the treatment they need, get the health care they need, get the education they need. We just believe that housing is the foundation on which the success of that depends. And so, so talking to folks about that, and anytime you can do a pretty nice balance, I would say, of your evidence-based solutions, your data points, your housing stability rates, with some good local stories from people on the ground who have had success through these models, I think that then appeals to a broader audience.
Absolutely. Great insights, excellent work. Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing these resources, your insights, and of course, your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Folks seem to have wrapped up kind of their main questions. I did see a question come up about the impact of the FY26 skinny budget request and funding for HUD-VASH programs. And so Sonia and I were doing a little chit chat to try to figure out what the impact would be. Interestingly, so there's not a specific call out around the HUD-VASH program in the skinny budget, but there is a section under the Department of Veteran Affairs Medical Care where it says that the budget would provide a $1.1 billion increase for the president's commitment to ending veterans' homelessness. However, it doesn't say specifically what program they're talking about when they're talking about providing this additional $1.1 billion. It is unclear. So unfortunately, we don't have kind of a final answer around that. But once the president's full budget request is out either later this month or in June, we'll have more details to share, and we will certainly provide updates on one of our next calls. And just a follow-up question from Sheila, are they proposing a workforce model for VASH? Not that I know of, Sheila. Great question, though. And again, it'll be, a lot remains to be seen still. And so with that, just want to express my deep gratitude to everyone for joining today, for all of the work that you're doing in your communities, and just keep up the good work, keep up the advocacy. I know that this was a heavy call and a lot going on, but together we are going to defend these vital programs from funding cuts and make sure that our neighbors have a safe place to call home. Thank you all so much for all of your work and for joining today, and take care, and we'll talk again soon.